Powered by Riverside FM.
1996 was a pivotal year for 3D games. Nintendo's Super Mario 64 would end up transforming not just platformers but nearly all titles from then on, by overhauling movement control and creating a new kind of sandbox adventure. Meanwhile, Sony and Studio Naughty Dog decided to stick to more conventional platforming, instead focusing on improvements in visual fidelity and character animation. Their efforts would pay off with Crash Bandicoot, who quickly wowed audiences with those advancements but kept them keen with strong 2D gameplay. As a result, he quickly became the system's mascot and took his place in the pantheon of platform stars. But Crash was never really a Sony property, and when the PS2 generation shifted the power balance away from platformers towards open-world games directly inspired by Mario 64, Crash was left a little unmoored. Instead, new developers would have to hone in on those key traits, his cartoony persona, and the world that surrounded him, with the goal of creating something as fresh as his first release. The result was a bold new take, though it's one that years later has gone somewhat unappreciated. So in the spirit of Bullet Time, this new series looks to explore the platformers that missed their landings, starting with one of its greats. So on this episode of Coyote Time, we head to Insanity Island with Traveller's Tales 2004 platformer Crash Twinsanity. I'll be drilling you for your thoughts on kind of Crash Bandicoot Wrath of Cortex. Yeah. Actually, you know what? I suppose that's kind of a nice place to start.
You mean Twinsanity, or did I play the wrong game?
Oh shit! I'm gonna keep doing that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Honestly, for a split second, I was like, "Wait a minute."
No, it was Crash Twinsanity. I guess I will say at the top of this episode. Then, hi. This is a prototype episode of, I guess we're calling it Coyote Time for now, which is basically Bullet Time, but for platformer games, which are kind of similarly 7 out of 10-ish. Kind of forgotten, but sort of beloved by people who kind of like them. But Wyatt, this was sort of your idea for a podcast, and I guess, do you want to kind of explain to the folks at home, like, what was the inspiration behind why do you want to talk about kind of crappy platformers, I guess?
Yeah, well, I think platformers as a genre are in a really interesting space right now, because there's not a ton of them made in the AAA outside of, like, big brand names, and really just, like, it feels like Nintendo and Sega, maybe. But the thing is, when they do come out, they tend to do very well, which makes it kind of an outlier. You know, they're not made every year, but then, like, maybe just because it has Mario or Sonic in the title, I mean, especially Mario, they tend to do well. And occasionally you have an indie hit. But, you know, it's a genre that survived in a really interesting way. You know, it doesn't oversaturate the market. You know, I certainly would like more of them today, but there's so few that it's hard to even, like, really see a lot of, like, trends, and like I don't even know what, you know, the next 3D Mario game is gonna look like exactly, because they can all be so different because they're so far apart.
And I think it's kind of an interesting thing that you sort of hit upon, which is, like, there is this massive divide between, like, because obviously with Bullet Time, with, like, the FPS genre, that's kind of flexible enough that you can see an FPS at kind of, like, every level of development budget, from all the way from, like, an individual making something like a Dave Szymanski or whatever with Dusk, all the way to, like, but then, like, you also have the kind of middle market with stuff like, you have a lot of, like, Eastern European game studios, like City Games and stuff, and, like, the people who make the Sniper Elite games. But then you go all the way to, like, AAA and even kind of, like, speculative quadruple A games, like Grand Theft Auto 6 isn't going to be strictly a first-person shooter, but I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't have FPS elements in it, because it is a third-person shooter. It does have camera modes. Platformers, though, as you said, it is like micro indies or kind of smaller independent developers.
Mm-hmm.
Massive gap. Sega, sometimes Activision, Nintendo.
Yeah.
Like that's and as a result, because so the only kind of stuff that we've sort of seen appear in this middle bracket have been a couple of the Embracer re-releases, like the Battle for Bikini Bottom and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I guess arguably, which is kind of relevant to the game that we're talking about today, is maybe the Crash stuff that obviously we had the kind of the original, like they did the rebooted trilogy, which funnily enough, a pal of mine, Tony Grayson, who is one of the designers on Anton Blast, that kind of like sort of Wario Landy 4 looking platformer game, which has a lot of Crash influence in it. He made an interesting point of the recent Crash games have like consistently outsold within like the same time periods like the newest Sonic games, which
that is interesting.
I do find it odd that it is kind of like, as you sort of said, Mario and Sonic are the only guys who are still kind of around, which I think a bit like Bullet Time as well. The idea with, if we do future episodes of this, obviously, that we're gonna try and avoid kind of the big franchise for the most part, apart from maybe specials, and obviously there's a lot of kind of like Mario spin-offs, which would be interesting to get into, which I think is kind of relevant for future episodes. And Sonic the Hedgehog's kind of the same thing. But like we kind of want to use this to focus on, okay, like there wasn't like a massive amount of platformer trends, but what there was, it would be interesting to kind of dig into that a little bit. And I think Crash is kind of a neat one because he kind of like was around at like certain fulcrum points of like platformer history in regards to like the transition from 2D to 3D. Yeah. And then into HD, and then kind of he sort of led the charge a little bit on the kind of like platformer revival that we saw a little bit of 5 years ago, which hasn't massively materialized into anything yet.
Yeah.
But not to say that might not happen, but I want to start with a question, which is, what is your kind of experience with Crash Bandicoot?
So at this point, I've played a decent amount, but the first time I ever played Crash was in Uncharted 4 when they play the opening level on the TV, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm not coming in like hugely familiar with him, very much an outsider. I've seen a lot of gameplay of Crash and all that. But then the Insane Trilogy came out, and I played most of that, and I played a bit of Crash 4, and I played like the racing games, and that's really it. I mean, that's a decent amount, but he does have quite a storied history.
Sure. Yeah. And I think it is quite interesting from what you've said in regards to like kind of where you started with it was sort of all the stuff that kind of came out after his appearance in Uncharted 4, which I think for a lot of people was like a nice reminder of, this is kind of where Crash Bandicoot came from. But not only that, but like talking about like kind of trends in the games industry and stuff in regards to like, well, platformers have started to, again, apart from Nintendo, who are obviously, they march to the beat of their own drum. Yeah. Kind of like, most of the industry kind of moved very quickly away from platformers. I always think of this in regards to like GTA 3, where it's kind of like you needed to have Super Mario 64 to figure out movement in 3D. Yeah. But then that didn't become like the de facto game that everybody... Well, it was for like maybe a minute, but then everybody very quickly turned into, GTA 3, third-person shooters, because like it mixes... Everybody loves an FPS game because it's like, you know, you get to shoot stuff from afar and you get to have like big weapons and stuff like that. But it's also kind of like a platformer like Mario. You can jump about and you can explore places. And GTA 3 kind of felt like the sort of cross-section of that. And then eventually what every game has kind of become is, well, not everything has to be open world, but we'll keep the structure of, you know, you being a action guy, which... Naughty Dog very much went from figuring out, like, getting their feet wet in 3D with the original Crash games, then expanded the scope with like, well, funnily enough, there is a missing link with that, but I'll kind of get into that when we talk about Crash Twinsanity. But then they kind of open the well a little bit more with Jack, and then by the time the PS3 comes along, they've kind of like realized what they are, which is essentially, we want to make cinematic games starring like human protagonists and kind of, you know, adventure gamey. Like even something like The Last of Us is still, for all intents and purposes, an adventure game. It's just obviously kind of got pretensions of being a little bit more heady than something like a Gears of War, which I think if you talk to most people now, like that is what they would think of Naughty Dog, is like, oh, they are the Last of Us guys. Yeah. Which I find so funny considering that like their name Naughty Dog is like, that is not like a developer name that you would give to the people who made The Last of Us. Yeah. It is a perfect fit for Crash in such a weird way. So have you so you played the like the Insane trilogy then? Yeah. And how did you find it? Like, because I imagine that your platformer diet up until that point was stuff like Mario Odyssey and kind of like very kind of open worldy style platformers.
Yeah, like, you know, as someone who is younger, I guess, but cares about games, like, I've always had less access to the games that I wanted to play, like, you know, because before I knew how to use, like, emulators and stuff, I was very interested in these things, so I wanted to play Crash and all that. Yeah. And so, like, I can probably tolerate some of the clunk more than, like, someone a little bit younger than me or someone who just, like, wasn't, I don't know, as into, like, I don't even want to say older games, because Crash is not that old relatively, but you know.
Sure.
But, like, it's an odd remake because, like, I can't remember what the problem with it exactly was, but they either, like, did they keep the level design exactly what it was, but change his jump arc or something?
Yeah, I know that people kind of, like, dug into it and they said that, like, the collision detection wasn't quite right because of how they did bounding boxes and stuff. The physics was also not as, like, immediate as it was in the originals, and it was down to, like, some people blamed it on the fact that they used Unity, I believe, but I think it was just more of a fact of they changed, because the original Crash Bandicoot games, for the most part, were designed around, like, the D-pad versus, like, this was designed from, this was designed from the ground up for the analog stick.
Whatever it is, it's like, I think actually, yeah, that's a really good point. I think the fact that you have to use you don't have to use an analog stick, but it's what is, you know, you would expect to do in this kind of game. It does make the whole game feel a lot worse, basically.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's a couple things I just kind of think are bad design. Like, there's the sections where the camera is facing away from you as you're like,
oh, interesting,
you can't see. I really don't like those sections where you you know, you can't see the obstacles like ahead of you sure, very well. But for the most part, I liked it quite a bit, especially because it hits upon a niche that you don't really see, because it's you know, 2.5D obviously means like a 2D plane with 3D graphics, but I may have made this point before, but it feels like 2.5D in that, like, it's a little bit 3D. Like, it's a very narrow field. Like, you're more or less moving, like, left and right or, like, forward and back, and you're jumping, but, like, I don't know. It basically could function as a 2D game a lot of the time. And I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to the kind of the experiments that Nintendo was doing after Sunshine, where they kind of had to kind of go back to the well a little bit. And I've always wanted to, like, if I ever get any kind of clout in the games industry, or if I could ever convince, like, I don't know, somebody like Jacob with a bigger subscriber count to do this for me, but I would just love to sit down with the, like, developers of Mario Sunshine and kind of ask them, like, okay, like, what happened in regards to...
Yeah.
They made that game, which, for all intents and purposes, people know that, oh, it was kind of rushed and, you know, it didn't have this level of polish. But then it still sold very well. And yet it felt like, oh, there's something missing, like we haven't quite figured this out. And then they make the remake of Super Mario 64 for the Nintendo DS, where they go, okay, we're sort of, maybe smaller biomes might be the way to go. And then New Super Mario Bros. Comes out on the DS and is this ginormous hit. And people go, oh, maybe the thing that people like about Mario is that it is a little bit more locked down. And so for about 10 years, you get the first two Mario Galaxies, and then Mario 3D Land and Mario 3D World, which, I mean, I said this in a video about a million years ago, but I always kind of thought that 3D Land was kind of like almost like a natural successor to something like Crash Bandicoot, because it is very locked down in, like, the camera placement is completely taken out of your hands, but as a result, the level designers can basically use it like another color on the palette, essentially, which, I mean, I totally agree with you. Like, when I was a kid, I absolutely despised those, like, running into the screen, running away from the boulder levels. And it's one of those things that, as, like, with my design hat on, I go, oh, this is very clever because it's making it more challenging because you can't see, they've been able to take, the same ingredients and essentially make a different dish out of it. But
yeah,
I also get the thing of like, it's kind of like weirdly anxiety inducing, and it doesn't have the thing that Mario 3D Land had, which was actual like palpable depth. So you could sort of see when like, obstacles and stuff were coming up.
Mm-hmm. It is mostly tolerable because at least the checkpoints are forgiving enough. And at least in the remake, like everything is very fast. So I really can't complain too much, but... And you were saying?
No, absolutely. And I think that's kind of... And I don't know whether this might be the bit of a linchpin of this episode in regards to, like, talking about Twinsanity in regards to... Mario and... Again, not even though I said, we're not going to talk about Mario and Sonic, but it's very hard to talk about platformers without talking about, like, the two biggest names in it, because you feel like everything's kind of in comparison to, like... Especially in regards to Mario, because he was like one of the earliest to do it. Everything kind of feels like a reaction to him. Like Sonic the Hedgehog was literally created as a like counterpoint to Super Mario to sell the Sega Mega Drive and Genesis. So, but I always think about that in regards to like these platformer characters, and you go, okay, what is their identity? As in, like, if I was to go up to you and say, how would you sum up Super Mario? Like, what would you say?
Plumber, jump,
plumber, pipes. I mean, I guess like Mario games. Like, what's something that you would maybe get out of those that you wouldn't get out of, like, I don't know, like Crash Bandicoot or something?
I don't know. That's actually an interesting question. I'm not sure entirely if you're looking for something specific, but like.
No, just your interpretation.
I honestly, like, this kind of goes for most platformers, but even like Mario, there is almost a cohesive, I guess there's a cohesive identity in terms of like, just style, obviously. I mean, this is very basic, but it's, Mario is very like inoffensive. He's very happy and, light for the most part. But he's kind of more than other platformers even defined by... Like, it never feels like an identity crisis the way the genre in general, like, might, appear. But, like, he definitely is defined by reinvention, I'd say. Like,
yes.
In the 2D series, 2D platforms in general, it really feels like those are so easily understandable. And I think everybody gets them. But 3D platformers, like... Again, it's like occasionally they hit upon a niche, and you can certainly see, the connections between like 64 and Odyssey and all this, like, in these little sandbox worlds and all that. But each game really feels like it is trying to reinterpret what a platformer is in that current year. And like... this is interesting, and this is kind of also why I find the idea of this podcast interesting in general, is because, you could argue platformers began because, like, early video games, the first thing you do is like you learn how to move your character, like you said. And then a lot of the industry has decided like, okay, well, that's the basics, and then we can move beyond that. But there's obviously something so compelling about platformers, like both just simply in the act of movement, but around that as well. There's so much space to explore. But yeah, like anytime someone tries to hit upon it, it really feels like they take it in a different direction, which is interesting. But again, it's like there are just so many different kinds of platformer, and
sure,
and even Mario, like again, like the capture mechanic in the Odyssey feels like it makes a completely different game compared to even like Sunshine and 64, and they're always like, I guess structurally similar, but there's always the gimmicks they tack on makes it feel like a completely different series or something. There's not a ton of iteration outside of the 2D games, and I guess like Mario Land and World.
I struggled with this exact same question. Like, that was sort of in my mind of this was because my theory was always like, oh, a very good video game character like has a strong identity. But Mario's thing is that the only cohesive thing that is between all of his games is just jumping.
Yes.
Like, there is not there. Yeah, like as stupid as it is to sound, like that one thing that all video game platformers do, like that is like Mario's main verb, and that is like the majority of how he interacts with stuff is through jumping. And kind of like, I always think with like the 3D games, like are always going to be my favorites, but it's literally because that's what I started off with. But like, I think with the 2D games, it was very much kind of an element of, okay, like we kind of nailed these character controls like very early on. And so the thing that we now want to develop on is the obstacle course. So you start at one end of the level and and then you go to the other end, and it's like, okay, now it's our job to figure out like the most interesting journey through that. So we'll come up with different kind of like moving platforms and stuff like that. Stuff that will get the most out of Mario's ability to jump. And then kind of in 3D, they were like, oh, we can now make his jumping a little bit more expressive, because we're not just thinking of worlds as these sort of flat planes that start in one end and then go to the other. We can also have walls, and we can have the ability to like, wall kick and stuff like that. And then suddenly Mario becomes this way more kind of like expressive jumping character. And I would say like even as you go to like Odyssey, like it's funny, the first capture that you get in Odyssey is a frog, and the way that they demonstrate that there's been a big difference is that he jumps at 3 times the height that regular Super Mario does. It's like, cool, like this is really neat. And then even when they lock down the camera and stuff, like in Galaxy and 3D Land and 3D World, it just becomes more like the old 2D games where it's like, okay, now it's become the obstacle course again. But then there's elements where, you might be on a spherical planetoid and you need to get like 5 silver stars or whatever. And for the most part, like I think it's also what you said in regards to like Mario is also kind of very like not quite innocent, but he almost has that kind of like Mickey Mouse timeless quality to him, because he is like, he doesn't say a lot. He has this very kind of defined and iconic design. And like, again, he's Jumpman. Like, for the most part, how he will deal with an issue is by jumping. Like, and then somebody like Sonic the Hedgehog is like, has the most defined identity, I think, of any platformer character, to a detriment, which is he's fast.
Yeah.
Sonic's entire thing is going as quickly as possible, which it's been funny, like, replaying those old games and seeing kind of like, oh no, this is, like, going really quickly is kind of part of it, but also, like, the fun of the gameplay is more like, he's kind of like a physics object, like, almost like those old-fashioned marble games, and being like, oh, like, I get why people really like this. And again, like, this is a really impressive demonstration of this technology, because, like, Super Mario World is very kind of square, and, Mario's jumping is always going to be very defined, but like Sonic is about like going down slopes and using that speed to get places that you shouldn't, which is really interesting. But also, again, the Mega Drive had like a bigger color palette, so you could make it more expressive. And then I feel like Crash is kind of like the next step from that, of like what is Crash's identity, to like the thing of, well, I kind of like, and again, like this is sort of where I came from playing Twinsanity, which is they essentially wanted to make a 3D cartoon character, like something like a Bugs Bunny or like a, you know, like an old fashioned Looney Tunes cartoon, and that was like prevalent all the way from the PlayStation original, because that the actual game itself is like those original trilogy games are very simple, and it was funny like doing research into them that Naughty Dog's main inspiration was the Donkey Kong Country games on the Super Nintendo, and the idea being that like those have you played those Donkey Kong Country games, Alvin?
I have, yeah.
Okay,
a bit at least.
So
I
you
don't
kind
think
of
I played the third.
No, that's fine, but you kind of know that like mechanically, like you have stuff like rolling or whatever, but like for the most part, it's like Mario. They're obstacle courses. But the big selling point is, it has this like really kind of like state of the art, you know, the future today art style to it, where it's all these pre-rendered 3D characters, but they're working in a 2D system.
Yeah.
And Crash kind of feels like almost like a reverse on that of, we have this like really, you know, cutting edge polygonal based, you know, renderer, but we want to try and make him look as stylized and as expressive as classic 2D characters, essentially. And I think for the most part, they do manage to pull that off in the, like, obviously it has like aged to an extent, like, you know, all the polys are very sharp, but like, especially those levels where he's running into the camera, like, I think the biggest selling point of that is just, especially like in the second game onwards, he's just like, you just see his face like freaking out because he doesn't want to get hit by the boulder kind of stuff. And I just think it's really neat. And like, that's kind of been sort of the nice thing that they have honed in with Crash. And the thing that I was kind of pleasantly surprised to see that, this is Twinsanity's entire deal, which is like, okay, we want to make something a little bit more freeform, a little bit more like Super Mario Sunshine, but how do we specifically tune that to Crash? And I know that this is kind of like a term that a lot of people throw around, but it does feel like, to some extent, like kind of like a playable cartoon. Like, you sit down, you watch like 5 episodes of Ed, Ed and Eddie, where in one of them, you know, they're doing this, but then in the next one, they're in a different location and they're doing this. And Crash has managed to kind of pull that off in quite a nice way, I guess.
No, absolutely. I mean, the game is, you know, especially this one, you know, just the breakneck speed in which you, like, change locations and, like, you know, entire mediums of traversal. Like, I completely see that.
Yeah. So, like, let's start. We're half an hour in, so let's finally dig into Crash Twinsanity. I mean, granted, it was a lot of like setting the table for kind of my weird thesis statement on this game, which is kind of like, this is kind of the most idealized form of Crash. Like, if you were to say, if somebody said to you, what is the game that you would like? What is the one game I would play so you completely understand Crash Bandicoot's like? What's his thing? I would say it's probably this, which is interesting because it's not a lot like the older trilogy games, and it's not really a lot like Crash Bandicoot 4, which for a while I would say was kind of like that. Like, that's where I would set the bar in regards to, this is Crash Bandicoot for me. But this has kind of come along and it's sort of disrupted a lot of stuff. But I will start by saying, so what did you kind of, like, what was your familiarity with Twinsanity, I guess, before we decided that we were going to play it for this?
I honestly think I only knew it had, like, a weird acapella soundtrack.
Yes.
I was really not familiar with this game. I thought it was, like, I mean, maybe it was a bomb. I don't know much about it, but, like, again, it did come out in kind of a weird time. Where Crash was maybe falling off and platformers weren't huge, but I barely knew anything about this game beforehand.
No, so it's interesting you say about it being a bomb. This game was in development hell for like quite a long time. I think when
Right.
it eventually came out, it wasn't the success that kind of Universal had wanted. This was also technically a new development team, although they had one more Crash game under their belts before this one came out.
Oh, okay.
And then eventually they kind of found their footing when, rather than focusing on the platformer style Crash games, they started to do the racing games.
Right.
Like they did Nitro Fueled and stuff like, and like Tag Team, and those are the games which we go, oh, like these, like those are kind of the Crash games of like my childhood, because they were very kind of like. And again, that's kind of like a thing to sort of mention as well with this, which I think is, you sort of hit upon it as well, which is like, these kind of games are sort of forgotten by time in a way that the Mario games aren't. And I wonder whether it is just because of the fact that Nintendo and Sega are very keen to, whenever they can, re-release their old games. And it's funny because there's a Miyamoto quote, which like very recently came out, where like, I'm going to mangle it, but it was basically to the extent of, you make a good game once and you can sell it for like years and years afterwards. And so, like Super Mario Brothers, that is still a game that is accessible. Like you can go on the Nintendo Switch, go to NES Online and play that game, and it is presented for the most part as it was when it was like out on release. But then also there's like the SNES remake of it, and you know, and it also was like re-released with the Game Boy Color and stuff like that. Whereas with these kind of PS2 era Crash games, they have been completely inaccessible since then. And as a result, like the only way that you're going to go out and play these games is to say for the podcast, you might have to emulate it like we did, or hope that it might get some kind of, you know, remake trilogy, which I feel like the only reason that the ones happened with the original Crash trilogy is that, and this is kind of an interesting aspect with Crash as well, which maybe I'll kind of speed run through this before we kind of talk about the game, but like, was considered by many like the Sony like platformer mascot at a time when having a platformer mascot was like people considered that was like the most important thing that a new games console needed in order to be successful. Was like, you need somebody with a strong identity that kind of sums up the console. Like, and I think it was because Sonic the Hedgehog was such a massive success and basically being like, Sonic is the Mega Drive. He can run faster, look better, do things that the SNES and Super Mario can't. And like, that was a massive success for them. But then the PlayStation comes along and it has a lot of different mascots made by all sorts of different studios. Some internal Sony studios and some not. And Crash was kind of the one that initially caught on in a way that like, because it wasn't the first platform game on the console. Like there was stuff like Jumping Flash and like Pandemonium and stuff like that. But like nothing really managed to catch on the same way that Crash did. And again, I think that is just partly down to, you know, him being this kind of like very expressive kind of cartoon character, but also like, and again, it's something that I can't remember where I say it. I think I made a video when I was talking about like why do controllers have select buttons, and I think I said something about the PlayStation, which was like the original PS1 controller has like 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the future of, hey, you've never seen a 3D games console before, and somebody hands you an N64 controller, and you go like, what the fuck is this? Like, what am I meant to grab? Meanwhile, you pass them a PlayStation 1 controller, and you go, oh, this is like the SNES controller. I know what this is. So I know that if I push forward, he'll move forward. I know if I press X, he'll jump. And Crash Bandicoot, for the most part, works exactly like that. Right. And so he's this very kind of like comfy anchor that like, hey, this plays like Donkey Kong Country, but it looks like way better than Donkey Kong Country because it's got like this sense of depth because of like where the camera is, and and they're moving the camera around like level by level. And like he predates like that original trilogy kind of wraps up before Spyro comes out, which is then hey, we can also make Super Mario 64 style games on the console.
Right.
And then like eventually you get Ape Escape, which is like, hey, here's this demonstration for our N64 like controller, which has 2 analog sticks on it. Mm-hmm. And it's weird, like as it goes along, the PlayStation kind of proves, hey, you don't really need a mascot, you just need good games. By the time that you get to the PS2, where you have Jak and Daxter and Ratchet and Clank, but that isn't the games that define that system. It's like GTA 3, Devil May Cry, Metal Gear Solid 2 initially, and then eventually becomes stuff like, Ico and like the Gran Turismo games and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And
God of War.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that then that just kind of leaves Crash in this weird place of, okay, you have now become unmoored from the PlayStation. What do you do? Like, how do you continue to be like a defining character when one of the aspects of what defined you, which was your home console, is no longer a thing?
Yeah.
And Twinsanity, I think, kind of makes a good case for, like, again, what does Crash life after PlayStation Crash, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I mean, I was going to go off in a totally different direction, but I think it's very interesting, especially, again, comparing it to, like, the Mario, it came out around the same time as, Sunshine. Sunshine does have a very well-realized world, that starts moving away from, the kind of more abstract nature of Mario 64, due to at least, like, the hardware limitations, of course, is a lot of the reasons, like, there's so many abstract worlds in that game. But it's funny because I think Crash made that jump really well.
Yes.
Like, this game, like, honestly, the first time, again, Sunshine does a decent job, but, Mario Odyssey has, like, it still has those, like, floating platform levels, those side levels, that are just, like, abstract blocks. But for the most part, everything feels very lived in a very interesting way. But Crash was, like, good at that out the gate. And, a very well-realized character, like you're saying, who actually is very expressive. And I especially notice in Twinsanity, like, the world feels so, I don't know, cohesive and lived in.
Yeah.
But it also dodges, like, a lot of, like, pitfalls of design around that, because, like, you see a lot of platformers like that are trying to have these more physically represented worlds that aren't just abstract, floating blocks. They can tend to look very muddy, and it's hard to tell, like, what's a hazard, for example, things like that.
Sure.
And I think Crash avoids that as well, and I find that all very impressive, especially considering, like, it's been so forgotten today. I don't know. That was my point.
I think that's a really good point. And again, I think it is just that, again, this isn't Naughty Dog, this is a new developer, but they've been able to essentially pick off where they left off. And again, like, they built the original Crash Bandicoot on the PlayStation kind of around the limitations of the PlayStation, but also the opportunities of it. And they went, okay, big, bright green grass, that will be the edges of the levels. Bright orange boxes and Crash, like, that's going to stand out from, like, sandy beaches and, like, ice and stuff like that. Like, everything is very kind of bold and colorful, and like, they're using as their touchstones, again, stuff like old-fashioned, like, Looney Tunes cartoons and, like, Tex Avery style stuff where, that was almost kind of drawn where all of the backgrounds are almost kind of simplified, but then all the foreground elements, the characters, they have a lot of, like, detail and animation in them. And Twinsanity manages to pull that off while also breaking away from the Crash tradition of, for the most part, locked cameras. Like, I think of that first area in Crash Twinsanity where I kind of have, like, this weird fascination in 3D platformers of the castle grounds, as in, like, when you start Super Mario 64 and they go, okay, boom, before you meet any threats or any enemies, here is a zone for you to figure out the controls, maybe do a little bit of exploration and figure out, like, 3D space, but also, like, give you a little bit of a tease of here's what's to come next. And Crash Twinsanity's, like, little starting area of the beach, I think, is cute. Like, very Jack and Daxter in regards to these little pockets of areas where it's like, okay, here's this activity where you jump on a cannon, and here's this activity where you you jump across a tree and then jump across a waterfall and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we just want you to get used to the controls, and we're also going to throw in like a couple of gems to teach you, hey, if you go off the beaten path or if you do some tricky platforming, we're going to give you these goodies, but also it doesn't matter too much, because if we're throwing them this early on, then you don't have to, like, and we're also going to show you what the rewards are, so you don't feel like you have to do this in order to beat the game kind of stuff. You get to see all the nice animation, and again, like, it's a nice introduction to the thing that you said of, like, what was the thing that you knew most about Crash Twinsanity, which is, the a cappella soundtrack, which obviously is kind of gone on to have a life of its own after the fact. But basically, in that little area, like, it does what the best hubs do, which is you just immediately get, okay, this is the game. Like, this is what... But, well, obviously, this is the lowest... Like, this is the entrance of the game. Like, this is the most fun that it is on a base level. And it kind of nails that, like, right out the gate. Do you want to... Controls is a bit of a tricky thing to, I guess, talk about on, like, in an audio-based, non-textual format, I suppose. But obviously, with kind of talking about platforming games, I think you kind of have to sort of tap into it a little bit.
For sure.
So before I hopped on the call, I decided to do a couple of small tests, which is I played the original Crash Bandicoot 3 on the PlayStation.
Okay.
I played the game that came out before this one by the same developers, Wrath of Cortex. I then played Twinsanity, and then I played about a minute of Crash 4. And I just wanted to quickly test, okay, how do these feel in the hand? Like, how, like, solid are they? I would say, with exception of Wrath of Cortex, like, all the Crash games have, for the most part, been very spot-on controls-wise. But the interesting thing with Twinsanity is that there is a tiny bit of looseness in it as you move about.
Yeah.
Like, it's not slippery. It just kind of feels a bit more like it reminds me a bit of those, like, Gmod animations where it's like they put all the sliders to, like, 2000% and then, like, faces are over animating.
Yeah.
When the kind of gait that he has of his run has that kind of feeling to it, but it's never at the expense of, like, losing control. There is a nice amount of when you hop off a platform or where you kind of, like, need to make a jump. It works quite well. I will say, though, it does... I always feel suspicious of games that have double jumps in them from the start, because I always go, you've either done this for one or two reasons. One, you've made these platforming challenges way too hard,
Right.
and you've added this as a crutch. Or, like, you've kind of added this because it's like, okay, what's going to be our, what's something that we can do that Mario can't? Oh, a double jump, which just means that all the platforming challenges are the same, but double the size and kind of more annoying to figure out. This and Crash Bandicoot 4 do exactly the same thing, where you start off with a double jump, but for the most part, they don't really force you to use it. Like, you can, if you want to, you can mostly stick to single jumps. The double jump is just kind of a nice corrective measure, like Flood was in Super Mario Sunshine, like, to go back to kind of, like, what was a contemporary of it at the time. And, like, as a result, like, 3D platform is always going to be a challenging thing of just, unless you have a 3DS, figuring out depth. So any kind of, like, small measure to just kind of, just correct a jump out of the fact, I always think is slightly appreciated. And while I would kind of be, like, disgusted if Super Mario had a double jump, I think with Crash it's okay. One, because they established it in the previous games, like, you could unlock it. But also, like, he's more of a cartoon character than Mario is, so I'm like, okay, this is fine. Like, I don't mind. And they are going for more of it's more light, like, it is a platformer, but I would say that platforming maybe constitutes 70% of the runtime, so I'm fine with them taking the edge off a little bit with a double jump. I mean, I don't know, what was your thought? Did the controls work for you?
No, I pretty much agree with what you're saying. it does. I think it does struggle in the sections where I'm thinking of one in particular, like a quarter through the game or something, with the boats that are spinning around.
Oh, yes.
And that was the only section where I had to start using save states because I was so frustrated, because it's really like they're very strange moving object, honestly, because they're moving and they're spinning, and like it's not a game where you tend to touch the camera a lot anyway.
No.
So I don't know. I was kind of unclear if I was really supposed to be using the camera to like actually moving the camera myself, or just letting the game do it. But that was the only time where it feels like an overcorrection with like a double jump is close to necessary, just because it's a little finicky. But for the most part, like the platforming is well, the controls are fairly clean, and it doesn't the jumps are you don't need to overextend yourself with a double jump too much or anything, and everything works pretty fine. I think this, in terms of the looseness, I slid off platforms a lot using the slide.
Oh, wow.
Did you not do that? At least at first.
That's funny, actually, because I was thinking about, because again, like I went back and I played a little bit of Crash 3 before this. They do include all the moves from the previous games, including, and I think I said this in my Crash 2 video, where essentially, like, I don't know whether they had seen Super Mario 64 and went, well, we can't make it fully 3D, but what we can do is add a modifier button that kind of like changes your basic attack and changes your basic like jump and stuff like that. So like you can do slides, you can do kind of a high jump, long jump, and then you can also body slam, which in those older games it kind of works, because like coming to a stop is kind of, because of the sort of the digital feeling of the movement anyways, it kind of works. Whereas in this, I didn't find myself body slamming that much unless I needed to, which again, I guess if I were to go into like the developer's room, I would just go, if you're not using it that much, I'd just get rid of it. Like, keep the controls clean for the most, like, don't overwhelm with too many buttons on the controller, which for the most part, this doesn't do. Like, you do mention that, like, there is you can manipulate the right sticks and move around the camera, which is what I was thinking of in that initial castle ground area is, hey, I can move, like, this is the first Crash game I can move the camera around and basically say where I want to go. But then that's kind of it. You have, like, some open areas, but then for the most part, the camera is thrown to the developer's controller, and then you just kind of use the stick if you want to maybe, like, make some platforming a tiny bit easier. But, yeah, it's interesting. And, I mean, I don't see that kind of as a failing. I just kind of go, hey, if you want to include like camera manipulation, go, like, as long as it's good, go ahead. And for the most part, the camera stuff in this is like spot on. So so from a game feel wise, it's solid, and from platforming wise, or actually, before we move on to that, I would say that the platforming is solid up until they ask you to do stuff that isn't really platforming, in which case it's either going to be the worst thing you've ever done in a game, or a really cool set piece that you kind of want another of. And
I'm very curious I'm very curious if we agree on all these things, because they're interesting.
Okay, I can save them if we wanted to just quickly go into what is Crash Twinsanity about, because then we could sort of go then through level by level and then talk about these gimmicks. So just to very briefly explain the game, then, and I guess to do so, I'll have to give a very brief overview of what the plot of the Crash Bandicoot games are, which is, hey, you're a guy called Crash Bandicoot. You're a bandicoot. You were experimented on by Dr. Neocortex to give you, like, humanoid proportions and, all that sort of stuff. You were meant to be a member of his army, but he shocked your brain, and it turned out that you were a big idiot. And he was like, oh, no, don't care about that. And he throws you out the window, and you go, damn. And so you go and defeat him, and then basically every game after that is just you defeating Neocortex. This literally picks up from the end of the previous game that this developer did called Wrath of Cortex, which is Neocortex and his evil mask are left just in the middle of like an icy tundra. And literally the beginning moment of this game is them in an ice block floating towards Twinsanity Island. That is that. The rest of the game is then you and him, like, Crash and his arch nemesis just kind of off on a weird adventure because there's a bigger bad than either of them. And you kind of and it's also very kind of freewheeling, as in you'll just go to a new level and they'll just introduce a boss for that level or like a new tone for that level, and it might last for about 5 minutes and then on to the next thing. And Again, it is very, like, they have sort of embraced the Looney Tunes tone to a full extent of where the Naughty Dog games were very video gamey, as in, here is the menu, here is level 1 where you are going to do this one thing, and then you go out of the level, and then level 2, and blah, blah, blah. This just is like a weird road trip. You flow from one thing into the other. And again, comparing this to Crash Bandicoot 4, which kind of doesn't, like, Crash Bandicoot 4 in hindsight is really weird because it wants to be this, but it also wants to be one of the old Crash Bandicoot games, and they're kind of like at loggerheads as a result.
Yeah.
This is just like, it's like the world's longest kids movie. Like, it starts at one end and then it just keeps going and going, but not in a bad way. Like, it is like if you marathoned like a Cartoon Network series, just sat down and just watched it all the way through. But there are like no natural break points. It just keeps going and becoming sort of more absurd as it goes along. Like, beginning with, you're on the island and Dr. Neocortex, who's this incredibly like intelligent, whatever, mad scientist, dresses up like Crash's sister and then like convinces you to like chase her through the forest. And while this is happening, he's getting like the shit knocked out of him by like all these different like obstacles and stuff, which is meant to teach Crash, hey, don't jump down the spike pit and all that sort of stuff, which then leads to the first of many boss fights of the game, which is like a simple Crash style, like, circular arena. You jump on the guy a couple of times and, all that sort of stuff. But then very quickly, these two characters are thrown together. And, like, one of the first set pieces that they introduce are these sort of rolling ball levels, which kind of, well, what was your sort of feeling on those, I guess?
They're okay. Honestly, they're okay. I really did not like them at first. Honestly, the parts that aren't going down a slide, I found a lot more tolerable. The slide parts, I actually was really not a fan of. And that's where I'm talking, like, that is even worse than like running at the screen. Like, that one, it's literally impossible to see the obstacles coming. Like, I don't understand how it's just trial and error. And I mean, I died, and it's like, it really, it doesn't have to be this bad, but the game has sometimes checkpoints that are very far away, and it also has unskippable cutscenes, and it's really hard sometimes. Otherwise, they would probably be tolerable, but then once you're on, like, flat ground, it's fine. Like, it doesn't feel amazing. It's very slippery, but you can get used to it.
It sort of splits the difference between, like, the Mario 64 slides, which I think it was very early on with the game where I decided, okay, this isn't a collectible game, because otherwise it would drive you mad, like going down the slides and missing gems or boxes. Like, you would go fucking mental, like, not being able to pick that stuff up. So at that point, I just said, okay, maybe I don't have to get all the boxes. Maybe that's fine. When you're on,
when I felt that too.
Yeah, when I'm on solid ground, then it is what you said, and then it's sort of like the marble, like, labyrinth thing of, don't go too far off the platform, and go on this precariously, like, tight lift. And I think because these sections don't stick around for too long, depending how many times you die, which I died a lot.
I died a lot on like that first section. I had to take a break after that.
No, to be honest, that I believe that was when I tried to play this game a couple of years ago. I think that was the breaking point for me. Was like, oh, this sucks. Like, I will pick this up another time.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you know, not to spoil things, but I mean, like, probably the worst part of the game. Honestly, like, it's pretty rough. It's a low point.
There's there's something even worse than that is later in the game, which we'll touch upon.
Okay. Maybe I'll change my mind once I remember it.
Okay. But then after that, like, you fight ants who are in a like, they just come up in a drill, and you're like, okay, that's kind of weird,
right.
But then that's fine. And then you're back on the surface, and then a beehive drops on Neocortex's head, and then he gets chased by a bear, which introduces my favorite sections of these games, which is I don't really know how to describe it, but I guess it's kind of like reverse mousetrap stuff, but it's like,
yeah,
you're doing platforming while another character is constantly running forward, and you have to activate like different obstacles and stuff in order for them to get to the end.
Yeah,
quite like that.
To a layman, it just looks like it's like a side scroller section, but it's you know, but it's not. It's interesting. Yeah, I like those a lot too.
Yeah,
they do strike a good balance of the. Because again, I generally think it's a pretty hard game. I think, like, do you not agree? I was having trouble with it a lot of the time, but I think those are like the most fair feeling sections. Like, nothing is too frustrating in them, and they're very consistently fun and creative.
Yeah, and I think they're like, in my mind, they're what sum up kind of the tone of this game, which is like,
yes, I mean, it's literally
cartoon.
Like is it what is it?
Cortex, yeah.
Cortex. It is like him stepping into rakes over and over for like 5 minutes. Like, you know, he literally gets a beehive fall on his head, and then you have to make sure he doesn't fall into a pit of spikes or whatever.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, it's a kind of, it is interesting character dynamics, because I think it was like, I doubt there's any kind of like Bible for Crash where it's like, okay, this character has to act like this and it cannot do this, and this.
Mm-hmm.
Like with this, I think which is very much in regards to like, oh, like, he's going to speak like, yeah, he's going to sound like Sideshow Bob, but he's going to be a complete buffoon.
Right.
And then Crash is the opposite, where he's kind of like this kind of like kind-hearted simpleton, but then also does beat the shit out of Neocortex non-stop as well. Which,
yeah.
They do flex between it, but it never feels kind of like tonally inconsistent in a thing of like, oh, I'm confused by this game, like I don't know where it's going. And again, I think it's just they keep it light and keep it tight for the most part, and you go from there, and then you kind of go through like a couple of more village sections, and then eventually it's decided, okay, oh no, then they introduce the villains of the games, which is like these two little alien guys, which
yeah,
they steal his brain, but then he gets his brain back or something. Again, I have played this game. I played it all the way through. I do remember bits of the plot, but again,
I was having such a hard time following it. I kept thinking like, I'll ask James about this. These characters were probably in like the previous games or something.
No, they were new for this, and they were kind of. And it's funny because they like their design again, like to talk about sort of like the influences of this game is like, yeah, they feel like kind of very Looney Tunesy designs. Like they feel like a mix of like Marvin the Martian, and then like the Instant Martians, like those little bird guys that you put water on. And
right,
yeah, and like, you know, they bring a stone guy to life, and then that becomes another boss fight that you work through. And yeah, like just. This is like the first half an hour of the game, and they like introduce as many different little set pieces as they can to kind of like keep you interested. And I think with like a lot of games, you would kind of go, oh, this has so many set pieces and changes in mechanics that like, oh, is this kind of like an insecurity thing that they don't feel like they can stick with one thing too long?
Yeah.
I think because this is what, the 5th Crash Bandicoot game or whatever, it's more that they know what works, and they can use the PS2 instead of being like, we can make this look better, which I mean, I kind of have my gripes with the graphics of this game, but I get to that another time, I guess. But it's like, okay, can we expand what you can do with Crash? And it's like, obviously, in the Naughty Dog ones, you had like the animal riding sections and like running into the screen, and then in the third one, you had like vehicles, like you could fly a plane and stuff like that. And that just feels like the evolution on this, but at least they've made it all cohesive into you flow from one into the other. And you don't really have to relearn the controls for the most part. Everything just kind of works really well. It just shows the versatility of like what you can do in a platformer in a way that, like, say something like Super Mario Odyssey makes that like kind of too obvious, where it's like, okay, now you're a Goomba, and so this is the Goomba section, or oh, now you're like in a tank, and this is the tank section, kind of thing. Like,
yeah,
this all feels super cohesive to Crash, which I think is like really well done.
That's totally true. Yeah, I was thinking of Odyssey too in that comparison, but that is a good point. Like, again, I was talking about how, you know, the world does feel really lived in, and yeah, like none of the gameplay modes, you know, well, it was a bit later than this, but you know, there's that era of like third person action games where you have to get in a tank for like 30 minutes sometimes.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, this game, you know, I was a little worried once like I found out it kind of switched genres constantly, you know, but it's really not to that degree. Like, it all feels very natural, and some are worse, some are better than others. In terms of like how they actually play, but it all makes sense in the world.
Yeah, and I guess maybe it's just kind of, so just to sort of sum up the plot as we've kind of introduced it, is basically these two alien guys, Cortex wants to stop him, and in order to do so, he needs the help of Crash. And then it just becomes a series of weird odd jobs, like you have to get into his base, but the door is locked, so you have to go the long way around. And then, oh, I've ran out of a power supply, so please steal the power supply from the other guy. And then, like, the different bosses kind of appear because they kind of realize, oh, Cortex is a pot, so we're going to try and, like, become the bosses of this game. And they just get picked off one by one as a result. And then they get the power supply, then he realizes, oh, I need help from my niece. So you go to this kind of, like, haunted school level, which was, like, again, something new in the Crash games, which I wasn't expecting. And then you all go to this dimension at the end to kind of like then take the fight to these guys. So to maybe just hop into different like set pieces from that stuff, I want to talk about my favorite ones, which are the snowboarding levels.
Oh my god. No, far and away the best ones.
Yeah. But they're very funny because it's like, oh, Sonic the Hedgehog had a snowboard. He's cool. Like, you know, he's gonna do tricks and stuff. What's the Crash Bandicoot version of a snowboard? Well, he literally kicks Cortex over the side of a railing and then rides him down a mountain, like standing on his back and using his big ass head to like blow through rocks and snow. Yeah, I adored these sections. Like, the controls are spot on in the way that when you're the rolling ball, they're not.
Yeah.
I love just downhill like there's a bit in Sonic Adventure 1 and 2, I think might have them as well, but like the snowboard section in Sonic Adventure 1 is like, again, is at the end of this long platforming level, and then like as a bit of catharsis, it's like, okay, you get to go down the mountain now, but to this like rock and roll soundtrack while doing sick tricks and stuff. And again, this is the Crash version of that. And they do it twice in the game. Like, they do it the first time, and I go, oh, I kind of wanted more of that. And so then when it happens again the second time around, and it's actually a chase, I'm like, oh, this is neat. Like, you've come up with like a really cool set piece here, and it's a good change on like the animal riding sections from the previous games where you're always constantly moving forwards. But this just feels way more dynamic because you have like ice luges and you can go up the walls and stuff like that. It's just, really well done.
Yeah, and like, you know, it's not necessarily like extremely impressive technically, but most of the game is you have a pretty narrow like field of view, but the camera angle also like opens up a decent amount, and you see this like pretty big like arena, and it feels like such a I don't know, such a big grand adventure. Like, it actually taps into like a pretty decent like spectacle as well during these sections, and again, the fact that he's like just riding Cortex is like genuinely very funny in a way. The game's humor, like, it didn't, and I don't know, it didn't like make me laugh out loud, but I found this very charming. And then, you turn into like a big snowball, and it's great. It's great stuff. Yeah, like at least in the first section. Yeah,
it's very cutely done. And again, it's like it's really funny that the second time it happens is, I guess, to kind of spoil the last bit of the game, but it's like you basically go to the evil dimension of like Crash Bandicoot,
right?
And you literally go to the same mountain and do exactly the same snow slide, but it's just in the evil zone. It's like, oh, this is literally the only place in the world of Crash Bandicoot you can do this. Okay, fair enough, I guess. But
that is true.
Really loved that. I thought it was interesting that you were saying, it keeps changing between characters, because I thought that was something that Crash 4 invented. It was like, okay, in this level you play as Cortex, or in this level you play as Torna. And not only is there all that stuff in Twinsanity, but all the stuff that they do in 4, which I thought was made for 4, is all completely ripped off from Twinsanity, which I had no idea about. So, so like, how did you, I guess, like, you had played the Crash games before, and then I guess you had been thrown into playing as Cortex and Nina, I suppose. Like, I don't know, what were your thoughts on like getting to play as them for a little bit?
I enjoyed Cortex a little bit more. Like, it's pretty straightforward, it's just almost like a really, like, no offense to the game, it doesn't have ambitions to be an action game, it's just kind of like a mediocre little action game, I guess. You're just, I guess it's still a platformer, but you're just blasting stuff. It's like a nice change of pace. It's a nice like palate cleanser. Nina was, I don't know, felt I didn't exactly get the point, because like her grapple hook is all right, but it's very on rails, her section.
Yes.
And it didn't feel near as necessary to me. It's fine, it's inoffensive, but it didn't really stick with me. Like, I honestly like may have forgotten about it if you hadn't brought it up.
No, that's fair. I mean, I would say it's the same issue that like the Torna sections in Crash 4 had, which is that, oh, this is just Crash, but like, again, it was the thing that I said earlier of like when games add a double jump, and it's like, oh, is this because it's like you're just going to do the same old platforming but make it double the size? That's kind of what the grappling hook does. It just is like, oh, hey, this is just a jump extender. We're not really going to do anything that interesting with it, which,
for sure.
Not that I'm going to go back in time and be like, okay, I'm going to fix this game for you, but it's like, you have Crash and Cortex are different enough where it's like, okay, what's Crash's deal? Well, he has the spin move, so all of his attacks are very... You have to get up close to enemies in order to attack them, and that obviously puts you at a risk. But then he has the Wario thing of, you have a vertical attack, which is jumping on an enemy's head for the most part, but that's harder to do in 3D, whereas like a physical attack is more guaranteed, but you have to put yourself at risk. Cortex doesn't have that issue because he can literally just shoot from afar, so it's like, okay, we can make that challenge more exciting then, because we can make the enemies heartier, or we can have like switches and stuff that you have to deal with. And so those are like really well figured out, but then with Nina, it's like, like, they just kind of split the difference between the two, and it's a bit, not super fully baked. And to talk about the things that I hate the most in this game, when you have to roll anything, which happens multiple times. Well, the levels with Nina are interesting because it's like, so all the way through, it's mostly the Crash Bandicoot staples. Like, you have the kind of jungly, islandy stuff, and you have like Papu Papu and the kind of like Maori style like villages and whatever. Then you have like ice levels, and you have the kind of industrial Neo-Cortex stuff. Like, okay, I've seen all this before, but she's at like this kind of boarding school for supervillains, and it becomes like the art style changes into like a kind of like a haunted school kind of thing. It's like, I've never seen this in a Crash game, but this fits really well. Like, this is a color on the palette that you don't get in those other levels, which is a lot of like dark purples and blues and greens, which kind of contrasts nicely with Crash's orange and Neo Cortex's yellow. You get like new enemy types, which are kind of like a mix of robots and kind of like school bullies and stuff, but also like kind of science experimenty stuff.
Yeah.
And it even kind of blends into the sewer level that's underneath it, like in a kind of a really neat way.
Yeah.
But I like the puzzles of having to have all the tubes connect up. I hated any time that I had to roll a ball in this game.
Okay, yeah. So I was wondering if you were talking about rolling Cortex in the barrel or rolling the ball that like attaches to you. I remember it's been a while since I actually played this game in full. Like I said, I replayed a bit of it last night. But I remember thinking the Cortex parts were fine, but throwing the ball I found extremely annoying.
So in the last level of this game where you go to the evil zone to go to the base of the two bird guys, there is a section where you have to get balls in a hole. Like it's like golf basically. And you have to get them across. You have
to do it across moving platforms. It's
And there's one where you have to get it across a gap and up a stairs. And the only way that you can do that is by spinning into them. And I could not get that consistently. It made me want to pull my hair out. It was so bad.
It genuinely feels like they're just trying to push the form like as far as they can to the point of tedium. Because it is, it's like, it's obviously not like Kaizo Mario stuff, but it's like it just feels like they were experimenting and it does not work.
Yeah, like in this game where you break boxes, why didn't we have some levels where you have to push something that's like a box? And it's like, this doesn't feel conducive. Like again, and like Crash can be kind of whatever you want it to be as long as it's funny. Like that's kind of Crash's main thing, is that he's a cartoon character, but I always think like a thing with Crash is that he is always kind of pushing forward as well in a way that like Sonic and Mario is. Like it is very obstacle coursey.
Yeah.
So like it's funny because like the section before that where it's you're jumping across the panels, but it's like Simon Says, you have to do red, green, blue, yellow. I loved that. Like, those kind of like memorization like platforming bits, fantastic. And that's because like that's the thing of, hey, we got this cool gimmick, but it fits very well within like what Crash's established thing is, but it's like, another color on the palette sort of thing. But yeah, just slowly having to push stuff into holes was just really stupid and not very fun. Like,
yeah, I this is such a weird comparison, but I don't know why I thought about this, but I was thinking about like Portal 2 for some reason, like just like I don't know, just like bunch of weird gimmicks that didn't entirely fit together. Just like, I mean, that's a little different, but I don't know.
No,
the puzzle.
I get what you mean though. Like,
sure.
Portal 2 is very, like, I mean, I have gripes for Portal 2, and I would say one of them is literally just like, it kind of feels like a comedian having like a very sweaty five. Like they're on stage and the audience isn't quite popping like they want. So it's like, okay, what about this thing? What about this? And they keep like, they'll introduce something, iterate on it for maybe like a second, and then drop it immediately. Like all the stuff in Old Aperture has that issue in my mind.
No, exactly.
Funnily enough, the multiplayer doesn't have that issue. They let everything sizzle long enough that you just get used to it in Old Aperture, and it's like, how did you like? Because the multiplayer for Portal 2 was made in like the last months of Portal 2. And like they only had a couple of months to fulfill it, whereas Portal 1, but the single player of Portal 2 was like play tested to death and like still feels not right. And not that this is the Portal 2 podcast, but But
I don't know. That was where my brain was.
It's funny. I guess Twinsanity could have had that issue with like, oh, now you're surfboarding, or now you're in a fighting dust cloud and you're rolling back and forth, or oh, you're doing another boss fight or whatever. But for the most part, it stays pretty consistent, and like I would say it's only those rolling ball stuffs that are a dud. Everything else works out pretty well, I would say.
Agree. Yeah.
And I think the platforming as well is that for every bad bit of platforming, there's like really solid platforming. Because I was thinking of when they go to get the energy supply from Embryo, whatever his name is, the guy with the rocket in his head.
Yeah.
All of the jumping that you do in like the underside of the ship on like really precarious platforms, that was a pain. But then all the rooftop stuff in like the boarding school, like I really love that set piece. Like that just works super well.
Yeah. I think those sections might be some of my favorites of the game. And like, you know, as you said, they are the most visually interesting, not really locales you see a lot in the Crash games, but they work really well. And it's I think the weird like high-tech environment with the like glowing memory platforms, like you said, are also like some of the most visually interesting of the game.
They do a lot, and they managed to even kind of go beyond a little bit of what Naughty Dog was doing, but while still very much sticking within the kind of, you know, it still feels like Crash. You know, there's nothing in, like, even the boarding school stuff still feels like if there was a Crash Bandicoot cartoon, like, this is the ghoul school that Neo Cortex is. These, that fits. It has those kind of like bent lines and kind of. Well, I guess that's the genius thing in it. Is like with Crash Bandicoot 1 and all those ones, you're running down these like dense jungles which are like corridors in a school. Like, boom, it's the same thing. It's just you're changing what the set dressing is. I guess let's talk about visuals and sound then. I really like the environments in this game, and like kind of I really like the environments in this game. I don't like any of the character models. I find them incredibly ugly.
Oh god, the bosses are pretty terrible. Like,
yes.
Oh my god, yeah. I'm glad you agree, because I wasn't sure, just because, again, I was like, maybe these are like beloved characters from old games or something. But they're...
No.
I don't know, they're so unmemorable, and they're just so like... Again, like, you know, a lot of like Saturday morning cartoon grotesqueness is probably what they're trying to capture. But it does not work.
No, like, the only ones that kind of work for me are the ones that are very... Either they are characters from the previous Crash games, like Embryo and Engine and stuff like that. Like, they, for the most part, don't look too bad. The woman, the headmistress, like, that, I would say, like, as a boss design, pretty solid. Like, it feels like they would be part of the weird human cast of, like, Crash Bandicoot. But yeah, like, the rock monster you fight early on is like very lame. The robot stuff is very lame. I meant more in just regards to, this is probably the ugliest Crash Bandicoot design I've seen in a Crash game.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Even taking into account the ones that they did afterwards, which were like the Wii ones, where they gave him like tribal tattoos and stuff like that. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so.
Oh god, yeah, they try to make him like more, he's punky and edgy. And he's got these sick ass tribal tattoos of his hands, and it's like, this is lame. Like, this is Crash like people have issues with it, but I like the Crash 4 design. I just think is perfect in regards to like. I just think, I don't know, he looks cute, but also he can be like really well animated, and I guess that's the main thing. Is like, oh yeah, of course, a character who's on like the Xbox One and PS4 is going to be better animated than like a PS2 game. I will say this though, the animation in this game is really nice. I just find the character models just really not good. Like, and again, I wonder whether that just might have been down to sort of the production problems that they kind of had behind this game or whatever. But yeah. Environments, really nice, solid. Particle stuff, solid. Like, the animation of the characters is fantastic, but I would say, apart from like a couple of like new things that they invented, just character models are odd, but I don't know. What's your? I mean, I guess it's kind of with you is like. I mean, I don't know how much affinity I guess you have for the Crash cast, but like, I guess did the game work for you or what?
Very little affinity, honestly, and also like
Sure.
I didn't really fiddle with my emulator settings much, so I was like reviewing the footage later, or I was watching someone else's playthrough, and I was like, oh man, I could have made this game look so much better. And then I really got to see what the game should probably properly look like, and I was like, So I didn't think much about it when I was playing it. I was like, this is fine. But then looking back on it, when I was reviewing other people's footage, I can definitely see what you mean. With the character models. But I just felt very ho-hum about it. Personally.
I suppose that's one of those things in it, because like I always think about this in regards to like why did the third person shooter become so popular, and I think it is because it just combined the best bits of an FPS, which is the control scheme of being able to shoot people from afar, with what's the best thing about a platforming game? Getting to look at a cool guy. And so like in a platforming game, I will always kind of rank a good-looking character or good-looking characters like quite high. And again, the PlayStation games, I think of like the original PlayStation Crash games, I think have aged really well in regards to working within their poorly budgets to kind of make like this really just cool, like solid-looking character animated really well.
Definitely. Yeah.
And then I'll give it this. So this was made by Traveler's Tales, but the game that they made beforehand, Rapid Cortex, that is an extremely ugly game. And I will say that at least this is a step up from that.
Okay.
And they did eventually get better at like making better looking crashes, and then eventually, well, you get the Insanity trilogy, and it's like. Doesn't look quite right. I'll give. Oh, that's fine. I'll give him that, but he doesn't look quite right. And then in Crash 4, it's like, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, it's good looking Crash. Good job, everybody. But one thing I will say is incredibly good in this game, though, is the soundtrack. Which so this was all done by a LA-based outfit called Spiromouth, who basically are only famous for this. They had put an album out beforehand, which was mostly a lot of covers. The most famous thing they did was a cappella cover of Come Together by the Beatles. And that was partially what put them on the map for this. The lead sound engineer was like, we're looking for an interesting sound for this. He knew one of the members of Spiromouth and said, hey, would you be interested in like working on this game?
Oh, wow.
And they composed the inside, like they did the entire soundtrack for this, and it's become like one of those things where it's been memorable enough that the later like kart racing games like Nitro Fueled and stuff will bring back tracks from this game because like people have like such a strong reaction to it. And I'll be honest, I do genuinely really like the soundtrack. This kind of reminds me a little bit of and I made this comparison elsewhere, but it's kind of a weird one, but it will make sense in a second, which is like, so Super Mario 64 comes out, and its soundtrack is kind of odd, but like it's sort of pulling a lot from different kinds of world music. Like there's a bluegrass cover of the Star theme and stuff, but I think of like the introduction, which is that drum and bass cover of the overworld theme from Super Mario Brothers, and it's like. I've never heard of anything like that before. Like, this has blown my ears off. And then you get into the main game, and it's kind of like, okay, this is fine. And then you get Ape Escape, which is like, okay, we're going to kind of one-up Super Mario 64 by not only having 2 analog sticks, but also having an entirely jungle drum and bass soundtrack. And it's like, yeah, this is the tits. Super Mario Sunshine, when you go into the like the Shadow Mario levels, and it has that kind of a cappella cover of the Mario Brothers theme. It's like, that's probably like the most memorable track in Super Mario Sunshine. Like that's the one that everyone remembers. And then it kind of felt like these guys went, oh, what if our entire game had a soundtrack like that? And hey, what do you know? It's like, it just works across the board. Like, yeah, I adored the soundtrack in this game.
I do too. Yeah, I don't really have much to add. It's very fun.
Yeah. My favorite is the track that plays when you're doing the snowboarding stuff, because it's not it's interesting because apparently how they did the soundtrack was that a lot of it was they did it live off the cuff, but then a lot of it was also they recorded them making certain mouth sounds and then ran it through like a MIDI and like played it like an instrument. And so there's stuff in there where it's so it sounds like, you know, like a guitar, like but it is literally just somebody going and it's like this is good. Like this is like such a clever, like again, like you could kind of almost say that it's like a reflection of the game itself, which is taking all these elements of classic Crash Bandicoot and breaking it up and like sprinkling it in different scenarios. That's the soundtrack. It's like taking all these kind of mouth sounds, like it's almost like the sort of like Crash would be humming to himself, and like just expanding it into like an entire orchestra of different instruments. And you know, like some levels you're gonna have like this kind of, you know, the simple ditty, but then when things get like more extreme, you have like the cover of Flight of the Bumblebee whenever you're doing the Cortex chase sections is like, yeah, so good. Like I don't know, was there like any track in particular that like stood out for you?
I also really liked all the classical covers. It's like obviously they're like you know, free use or whatever, but I don't know, I was really caught off guard by hearing them, but it's very charming to hear like all the acapella classical covers.
And again, it has that kind of Cartoon Network thing of like, oh, okay, like here's a level where you're going to be bouncing down at like a bunch. So here's a really goofy cover of The Blue Danube from like 2001: A Space Odyssey. You know, the music that they use when he's like floating in space, kind of thing. It's like, yeah, this is good. Like this is really cleverly done. And again, like, it's weird playing this game like after playing Crash 4 and going, oh, this is what I wanted. Like Crash 4 should have been more like this. And like part of that was like, yeah, like the soundtrack of that game should have went like a little bit further again. Because I don't know, it's weird. Like the Crash games have always like the thing that they've all kind of had in common is like really interesting, idiosyncratic like soundtracks. Like, did you know with the original Crash trilogy, they went to a studio which I think was called like Mutato Musica or something, which was founded by like Devo guys.
I don't think I did actually.
No, so like they had the guys from Devo like compose like, hey, how would you do like a Chuck Jones style like cartoon score for this? And
right.
they were like, oh, we come up with something kind of weird and idiosyncratic and use like a lot of different like weird sounds and stuff like that. And then for this, it's like, let's use a lot of acapellas. And then, I don't know, it's just kind of the newer Crash games. It's just a lot more safe and kind of like, oh, what's a cartoon, like, video game soundtrack going to have? Oh, it's going to sound like this kind of thing. And, yeah, I don't know. I don't know whether any more Crash games are on the way, I suppose. But I guess that would be one thing, is that if they do decide to make some new ones, like, maybe just go back to the well on like trying to figure out like an interesting sound for him again, because I guess like they have two good examples they can pull from, which is like the old PlayStation games and Crash Twinsanity. Maybe even try and like mix the two together in some weird way. I don't know, but yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything that we haven't touched on with Crash Twinsanity that much. Like, so like, how would you rank it like amongst like the other Crash games that you played then?
I think, honestly, I do think I'm less hot on it than you. But
okay.
I did think there's, like, you know, there's some clunky stuff here. I mean, obviously, but,
sure.
I do think it's, like, I admire everything it's doing, even when I don't always like it. Which, honestly, like, it does boost it up pretty high. Like, I you know, it's gotta be, like, I think Crash 4 is probably the best one, honestly, just because, I don't know. I'm a sucker for consistency and just, like, the quality of life of that game. Like, again, like, I got very frustrated at this game when I died too much, which, like, again, even though I could have just used save states more, and I probably should have and would have had a better time, it did, you know, kind of sour the experience somewhat. but
Yeah.
really solid experience overall. Again, like I think more to admire than not. So it ranks up pretty high there. Like honestly, like maybe number 2, just out of sheer like creativity.
I will give you that, and I think I think partially why I'm so hot on it is just because of the fact that I knew that it was a game that existed for a long time. I even kind of had a bit of a cold reception on it. Like when I hadn't played it, I just went, "Oh, that's one of the I had always thought that like all of the post Naughty Dog Crash games just weren't very good."
Right.
And so playing this, I was just like genuinely impressed by, oh, this is solid. Like this is like they've managed to. I think it was the stuff like the snowboarding levels and like all the new kind of level arrangements and even sort of the plot of kind of mixing Crash and Cortex together on this kind of weird adventure and like a lot of the humor in it as well, which like a lot of that isn't going to translate to the pod, like, saying stuff out of context, but like,
yeah,
it was all that kind of unexpected stuff, which like really won me over on it. But I do agree. And it is, again, I think probably the thing that we might be bumping into a lot if we do more of these is that, yeah, platformers of this era are always going to be marred by just a lack of quality of life and polish that,
yes,
especially games of this kind of budget, where, yeah, like they're never going to be tuned to the level of a Super Mario game. And even then, the Super Mario game that came out during this era has no quality of life in it and a lot of like really buggy controls and stuff like that. So when that is like your baseline for like an excellent platform, it's like, oh no, like for everything else.
Yeah.
But I think in regards to kind of like what is my ideal for Crash Bandicoot, which is, well, he's never going to be able to compete with Mario in regards to like that sheer level of polish and that kind of like almost brilliant simplicity of just a game around jumping and kind of like how can you, and obviously being able to pull from all the Mario like whatever like iconography, and he's never really going to compete with Crash, who has that similar kind of iconography stuff as well. But I mean,
do you mean Sonic?
I like a lot more 3D Crash games than I do 3D Sonic games, but that's kind of me, I suppose. But obviously Sonic's always going to have speed, and like that's what you're going to go to those games for. Crash to me is like, okay, this is like the Western answer to kind of like a big 3D platformer, and like what's something that like America invented animation, and so like they're always going to be a leader in doing character animation. And I think in regards to that, like making a playable cartoon, this is pretty, it's rough around the edges, but it does pretty much stick the landing on that. And I am like genuinely like, this is the magic of doing podcasts like this, where it's like you get to play a game where you go in either with preconceptions or like something you didn't know about before, and you just get like bold, like you just become incredibly charmed by it, I suppose.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I don't think it's ever going to happen, but I would be very curious if they would ever remake this game.
If they remade this game, but with the graphics of Crash Bandicoot 4, like slam dunk, like that is like I'll buy 10 copies, like, like that, like like if anyone from Microsoft is listening, if you want like a solid money, if you just want something to throw on Game Pass like you did with Hi-Fi Rush to win people over, that is it. Twinsanity resanitied or something, or whatever,
take Toys for Bob off the
Diablo. Overwatch
I was gonna say
2
the
or Diablo 4
Banjo-Kazooie that people think they're making. I don't know.
Oh, do they genuinely? Oh, is that the rumor that they think Toys for Bob are doing that?
I don't know if it's like sincere, but that's what I've heard recently.
God.
But I don't know. That'd be interesting, but
it'd be interesting. They got the chops for it. I mean, their Spyro, the Spyro Reignited trilogy is solid, but yeah, Crash 4 is just like, again, like the Crash series is just kind of one of those things that people kind of wrote off as, oh, well, this was good when we didn't know better. And it's like, no, these games are good. And
definitely.
Crash 4,
there's nothing like that.
I have my issues with Crash 4, but I would still say, no, this is like a fantastic game. Like, this is really solidly done. Actually, that's one thing I didn't really mention, which is that, so this fixes the problem that I had with Crash 4, which was like, Crash 4 wanted to do the thing where it wanted to have individual levels, but it also wanted to have the level of variety that like Twinsanity had. But because of it's doing that, the levels go on for like 20 minutes a piece. They go on really long.
Right.
And because Crash 4 is designed like the old ones where, oh, you have to get all the boxes and you have to get all the gems in order to like go for proper completion. Like, when you discover like, oh, I forgot to hit a box like 15 minutes ago and I'm like, none of the checkpoints are going to get me back there. Like, that stings way more than this, where because they're very much leaning into the sort of freewheeling nature of it, it's not very like, it's more forgivable in Twinsanity than it is in Crash 4, which, I mean, that's always the issue that like a lot of people have, which is like the moment that you go for like 100% completion in any game, it becomes a slog most of the time. Like even the Mario games have that issue, but
definitely.
Yeah, and I suppose if I went for 100% completion in Twinsanity, like I would probably, like I wouldn't have got as far as I did in Crash 4 because of just how buggy the controls are and a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I suppose the interesting thing that we didn't like super touch upon is just kind of like the development of this game. Not that we have to go into it too much, but I guess have you played much of the games the Traveler's Tales are made? Those are the guys who like they started doing the Pixar like 3D games, but better known today for doing the Lego games.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I played a good bit of the Lego games. I have not played Wrath of Cortex, the one they made before this, the Crash they made before this. So I guess I'm really just familiar with their Lego output, but I think I played their Finding Nemo game on PS2.
Fair enough. It's cute because I kind of have like, because like when I was a kid, I was really into Pixar. I mean, everyone my age was like really into Pixar stuff because it's like you've never seen it before. So like the Bugs Life game that they did in the Toy Story 2 game, which would be a good candidate for this podcast because it is like way, like it punches way more above its weight than you'd kind of expect for like what is essentially like kind of a cheapo Banjo-Kazooie knockoff. And just that, I kind of said at the beginning where it's like, oh, you have the AAA platformers and then the indies and nothing really else. No, I guess the Lego games do still fill that niche of like the middle tier 3D platformers, don't they? Because they still come out like one every couple of years, and they're still very, people really like those Lego games.
Yeah, I mean, they hit upon that formula, and they're still doing it.
It's one that works, and I wonder whether like, because it's funny because Traveler's Tales kind of began weirdly enough. What put them on the map was they made Sonic 3D Blast for Sega, which was like Sega's answer to Donkey Kong Country, where you had this pre-rendered Sonic moving around in like a 3/4 angle, and it was like partially 3D. And then they did Sonic R for them, which was like this racing game for the Saturn where it was like fully 3D. And then kind of bounced between different platformer franchises. They did the Crash games, but then really hit upon with the Lego games. But the only kind of development stories behind this game was just kind of as you expect. Like this game's very rough around the edges, and it feels like it's missing a lot of content. This was like rushed development wise. Like they had signed into an agreement with, Universal had signed an agreement with Konami to get these games distributed in Japan, and Konami was pushing for like, you need to get another Crash game out pretty quick. The initial plan for Wrath of Cortex was this, where they wanted to make a open world, for lack of a better term, Crash Bandicoot game like Mario 64.
Right.
Realized they wouldn't be able to do one in time for like the PS2 launch, which is why they did Wrath of Cortex. And then kind of use that almost as an asset factory for like, okay, we can build stuff in here to then kind of reuse it in Twinsanity. But then they ended up polishing a lot of that stuff up anyways. But they had planned a way more ambitious game, but they were basically told, oh no, we want to get this game out for like a promotion, so we're going to take a year off. You've only got like so many months to get this out. So they pared it back. They didn't get like as much time to kind of quality test it and stuff like that. And that was kind of it. Like, and I would say, knowing that, like, what was the bullet time thing of like, oh, when I know kind of the development history, well, when I learn any kind of game design, I go, oh, it's kind of a miracle that games happen anyways. So I'm I'm always going to be impressed. But yeah, like, I think especially considering the first Crash game they made, like this is like a leaps and bounds, like in regards to growing the IP and doing more with it while still keeping very much at the heart of what Crash is. Like, in a way that, again, if you would only play the original trilogy and then play Crash 4, you go, wow, Crash 4 is like such an expansion on what you could do with the concept. But then Twinsanity feels like it, like, even more like experimental, but it all kind of, but like it still fits within Crash. So yeah, it's very cool, and obviously it's always good to see developers still thriving. Fingers crossed that touch wood that Traveler's Tales is still going to be around in 2024. Hopefully there's going to be more. I mean, I guess what's going to be the next Lego game, because they've done like they did like they did that big old Star Wars game, didn't they? Not too long ago. So like
that game's really fun too.
Yeah, it is really good. I saw people stream it, and it's like, oh, this is nice. Like, this is like fleshed out kind of adventure. Like, they've done like a fleshed out open world version of those old Lego games. It's great. Yeah. But I don't know, what's the next big franchise left? I guess maybe they'll do like a Marvel version of that. I don't know. But,
yeah. I can't remember if they did the other Lego Marvel games. People do like some of those.
Yeah. I always think with those is that like those are like those are the Marvel games that you want while the Marvel films are out, because like they did that the Square Enix one, which was made by Crystal Dynamics, where it was like, oh cool, you know, oh it's all the Avengers, but it looks like The Last of Us. This game's gonna be sick, and then it came out and it was like, yeah, this is Destiny. Like this is a everyday grinder game. And it's like, how did you like completely miss the memo on that? But, yeah,
it's an odd one.
Hopefully it's not good. I tell you what is good though, Wyatt, because we got to the end of the episode. Let's do the quiz. Which,
all right.
Yeah, you're in the quiz hot seat for this one. So, this video game came out the 28th of September 2004, and then came out 2 weeks later, October, in the rest of the world. This game, unfortunately, appeared on the charts at number 25 in its first week. So, not very high for poor Crash. And again, I think that's partially why people kind of stick this with, oh, this wasn't a good Crash game because it didn't sell very well.
Yeah.
I think just the competition at the time was pretty strong. And I also think this was just people were moving away from, like, people just kind of thought platforms were a bit blasé, you know? Like, everybody wanted they wanted stuff to be like GTA, which is like how you end up with Jack and Daxter, like, becoming dark and gritty and stuff like that, which, I mean, hey, it was successful for Naughty Dog, for, you know, whatever with that. So yeah, no, unfortunately, 25 on the charts, but we're going to go through of this week, the top 10 games. I'm going to need you to guess each one. And we're going to start with number 1, which is a new entry this week. It's a sports game.
FIFA.
Yes, I'll give that to you. It is FIFA 2005, the newest.
Well, that's what FIFA I would have
said. Yeah, exactly. Right, number 2, new entry this week. This is an exciting one. This is the first game in a brand new Microsoft first-party franchise.
Okay.
End of 2004.
Oh God.
So original Xbox.
Oh, Halo.
No, it's not Halo.
Oh God. Oh no. Original Xbox.
I'll give you this clue. Okay. It's a franchise that you're excited for. They're making a new one currently.
What? Oh God. Well, my first thought was Gears of War, but obviously it's 2004.
No,
it's much too early. It's a franchise I'm excited for. Oh God.
A genre that you wouldn't really associate with the Xbox either. Like the Xbox, it has a lot of shooters, it has a lot of racing games. It doesn't have a lot of these. This is something that like the PlayStation is better known for, I would say. But this is Microsoft's take on it, and I would also say it's a game with a lot of British flavour to it.
Oh, Fable. Okay.
Yeah, number 2 this week, new entry, is the first Fable game on the Xbox, going in at number 2.
Got it.
Right. Number 3 this week, up from 5th place, is a JRPG for the Game Boy Advance.
Golden Sun.
It is not Golden Sun. It is a Nintendo franchise.
It is a Nintendo
way
franchise.
bigger.
Oh, God. Yeah,
It is a Nintendo franchise.
Wait. I don't remember which one it is. It's Pokemon, obviously, but like...
It is Pokemon, yes, but which one?
God, I'm so bad at... Jeez. 2004? I'm gonna embarrass myself. Gold? It's not gold. God.
It is not gold, no. I will say it's the ones that are... I'll give you this clue. So it's not Ruby or Sapphire. They came out a year before. These are the remakes of the Game Boy games.
Oh, Fire Red.
Yeah. So it is Pokemon Fire Red and Pokemon Leaf Green.
Of course, that makes sense.
Right. Down from second place from last week is a PC game, a pretty massive franchise, I would say, but a very PC-specific franchise. I don't know if it's big at the moment, but an EA published game.
EA published game. Oh God. I have no idea.
Okay.
Am I allowed to ask questions?
Yeah, of course. Nobody ever thinks to ask questions on this, but you absolutely can. So go ahead.
Did you say what genre it was?
I haven't said what genre it is.
Or what genre is it?
I feel if I give you the genre, it will give it away. So I'm going to be cryptic with this.
Okay.
It's like it's simulation. I will say it is a simulation game, but a very specific kind of simulation, like a simulation of people.
So it's The Sims.
It is The Sims, but which
The Sims
one?
2.
It is The Sims 2, down from
okay.
second place.
I was gonna say like Splinter Cell or something first,
Interesting.
because I think there's a Splinter Cell in 2004. But then you said simulation, so I was like, okay, yeah,
I think 2004 was a good year for games. Just kind of looking at this list of stuff, but
yeah.
Number 5 on the list, down from 4th place. Fun fact for people at home, one of my favorite video games of all time, but my clues to you are EA published a racing game.
I have no idea.
Okay, I will make this a bit easier. It is not a Need for Speed game.
EA published. I'm not gonna be able to guess which one it is, but I'm guessing Burnout.
Yeah, it is a Burnout.
It is a Burnout. I have no idea.
Do you want to guess a number?
2.
It is
3.
Burnout 3. Yeah, it's Burnout 3 Takedown, which is the first EA published one, and this was the game that kind of solidified the relationship between EA and Criterion. It was today. Funnily enough, we talk about Burnout 3 Takedown quite a bit on the Bullet Time episode about Black, which was the FPS game that he made after that. Number 6 this week, which is a non-mover from last week. This will be tough. This is I guess it's a real-time strategy game, but it's a very specific kind of one. A really famous franchise in RTSs.
StarCraft 2?
Not StarCraft 2. It's a historical
that was before,
RTS.
right? And that was much later anyway.
Yeah.
Historical RTS, that's what you said?
Historical RTS, yes.
Age of Empires 2.
No, it's not Age of Empires. It's the other. It's the not Microsoft franchise. It's the franchise that Sega publishes now. If you can believe that.
I have no idea what Sega publishes. And
oh no.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, there's not too many. I just can't think of the name off the top of my head.
Yeah, no. So it's the one that is an Age of Empires, historically based. It's about all the different games cover like a different like sort of dynasty or anything.
Oh God. I can't remember the name for the life of me. God.
Do you want me to put you out of your misery?
Yes, please, because I know what it is.
Number 6 this week in non-mover is Rome Total War.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, Total War.
This number 7 though, I think you might get. It's a new entry this week. It is. I don't know what number entry it is, but it is a long-running franchise which has kind of disappeared recently. But it did get funnily enough, did get an Activision remake not too long ago, much like Crash and Spyro did. But this is a sport. It's an extreme sports game.
Who'd you say published it or developed it?
This is published by Activision. It's developed by Neversoft.
Tony Hawk 2.
It is a Tony Hawk 2, but
wait,
you're missing a word.
Oh.
What's that?
What am I missing? Underground 2?
It is Tony Hawk's Underground 2, number 7
okay.
this week, new entry, which...
Got it.
Good game. I know that's the one that, if you get the PC version of that, you can, like, patch it to add, like, all the other, like, skate parks and stuff, which is
that's
cool. Yeah. Right, we're nearly there. Number 8 this week, down from first place, is a third-person shooter series published by LucasArts. Developed by Pandemic.
Oh, no. Well, it's not Battlefront, because that's not third person.
Well, okay, I'll give it to you. It is so number 8 this week, down from first place. It is Star Wars Battlefront 1.
Is that a third person game?
Yeah, it's a third person. It is mostly third person, but you can change to first person.
I don't know why I remember that as a first person game. Okay.
There we go. Well, yeah, it is. So the first Star Wars Battlefront is on number 8 this week. Right, number 9, up from 10th place, so it's moving on up. It is a EA published game.
Okay.
It's a fighting game, and it's named after a music label.
I have no idea.
Yeah, this one may have passed you by. But,
maybe, especially if there's not like a lot of modern entries. God.
Oh no! So this was a franchise. This franchise got like 3 entries.
Oh no!
And they were all. This is the last one on the Xbox, and then the next one was on the 360, and then it kind of disappeared, unfortunately.
Okay. It's named after a music label.
Yes. Remember, you can ask questions.
Okay. I don't even know what to ask without. And you said there's okay. Its last entry was on the 360.
Yes.
Oh god.
But this isn't the 360 game. This is
right. This is the Xbox.
This is the second game of the franchise.
Okay. Damn. I don't know. What's the first
I'll give you a clue.
letter?
The music label is best known for putting out a lot of music in hip-hop and rap.
Okay.
So
For some reason, that was my first thought, just because those kinds of names, are kind of aggressive often, and oh no. I'm thinking I'll start naming like hip-hop labels. I have no idea.
Okay. I'll give you the point then, if because this game has a subtitle, guess what United States city this game is set in?
Baltimore.
It's not Baltimore, no, but you were correct in regards to it being on the East Coast. Number 9 this week, up from 10th, is Def Jam Fight for New York.
Okay, well, New York was going to be my second guess. I don't know if I know this game.
No, This might be a game that completely passed you by. So, yeah, there were 3 Def Jam games that came out. 2 of them came out on the Xbox, and then the last one came out on the 360. They are interesting, is all I'll say. The first game is like, it uses like a wrestling game engine, and it's like about like doing like body slams and stuff. And then Fight for New York is more of a fighting game, and then like Icon is like, they use the boxing game engine, but it is also like a side-on fighting game. But yeah, it basically stars all the rappers of the day. Like,
no way. That's awesome.
Snoop Dogg, Ludacris, Method Man, Lil Kim. They're all in Def Jam Fight for New York.
That's awesome. That rocks.
That's pretty good.
I've never heard of this game. That's incredible.
Oh, we'll have to come up with a different podcast idea to cover the Def Jam games at some point. But we'll wrap this up with number 10, which is a non-mover from last week.
Okay.
It's a open world crime sandbox game based on a television series.
What? That last sentence is an interesting one. Who published it?
Fox Interactive, I think, or it might have been.
That doesn't help.
No, it might have been Vivendi. I think it might have been the same people who published the Crash game that we just talked about.
Interesting.
It was developed by Radical Entertainment. I can say that much.
Okay. Paste. Oh.
But Fox Interactive should be a clue, because this was a TV series that was on Fox.
Right. I mean, I'm sure I'm just blanking on the name, but I have no idea.
Well, I'll help you narrow it down. It's a TV series that is still ongoing and has moved to Disney Plus.
My first thought was Doctor Who, because I moved to Disney Plus this year.
That isn't even the BBC though. This is a this is a Fox project. This is the show that kind of put Fox on.
Oh, yes. Well, I don't know. I don't remember which one it is, but it's The Simpsons.
It is The Simpsons, yeah.
Road Rash.
It's the sequel to Road Rage.
Okay, I actually don't remember the name of that one. Is it Road Rage?
I'll give it to you then. It is The Simpsons Hit and Run.
Hit and Run, right? Yeah.
A game that a lot of people quite like, including myself. It's pretty good. But yeah, there's a weird open. It's basically GTA with The Simpsons in it.
Yeah, I don't know how I forgot about that one. Yeah. I was thinking a live action show, which makes no sense.
No, I was going to say, if I had said that it was a cartoon, I feel like that might have given it away. But
yeah, probably. There's it doesn't really apply to many other games.
No, but there we go. So I guess with that does bring us to the end of this kind of prototype episode of our platforming podcast where we talked about Crash Twinsanity. So because I kind of led the conversation a lot of this, I will throw it over to you, Wyatt. If you want to, if you want to plug stuff, if you want to point people towards some stuff.
Subscribe to Wyatt Joseph on YouTube.
There we go.
Where I talk about other things, probably.
Nice.
That's all I got.
That's fine. Subscribe to Hot Cider on YouTube as well, HOTCYDER, and I'm still on the website currently called X at Hot Cider as well. And for this prototype episode, that is it. Thank you for listening. This podcast has been made possible by Dylan Robinson, Eric Hamilton Schneider, Jesse Garasha, Kevin from Pixellet, Mouse, Twyla27, Valerie B, VG, and the Hot Cider support tier. If you'd like to help with the production of episodes and gain access to extra content, consider supporting over at patreon.com/Hot Cider. That's HOTCYDER. A special thanks to Max Coburn for the Bullet Time theme tune.